Hi, I am Lolade, and welcome to the Perimenopause Playbook, where we empower women in peri and postmenopause to take control of their lives, starting with your home as ground zero for cognitive health. Through neuroscience-informed design, we create a toolkit to support your cognitive, emotional, and personal transformation, evolving with your needs. This is where you reignite your power and make things happen again, starting with the space you live in. Stick around. Hello, welcome back to episode 18, which I've titled The Habit Loop and the Home, and how you can break and build neural pathways. So just a quick recap. Last week we started this series on strengthening neural networks for positive spatial and lifestyle habits. And we kicked this series of 10 episodes off with the home as a neural extension. If you haven't listened to it yet, go listen, because it sets the groundwork for the next 9 episodes in the series. So in this episode, we're going to be exploring the neuroscience and the psychology of habits. We talked in the last episode, I gave an introduction to the concepts in neuropsychology, that's neuroscience and psychology, that relates to the brain system, human system, and environmental connection, and how these work in tandem to inform our thoughts, our moods, our emotions, even our habits. So in this episode, we're going to explore deeper the neuroscience and the psychology of habits after setting the groundwork for the definitions of neuroplasticity and so forth. And we're going to talk about how they form, and we're going to talk about how they get reinforced, and most importantly, how we can rewire them using scientifically grounded principles. We're also going to examine why habit change can feel more challenging during perimenopause and postmenopause, and we're going to link this to neurochemical shifts and how they impact our cognitive function, and more. We would also discuss the role of environmental cues in our homes in our external environments, but because this podcast is about, my service is about residential spaces, we're going to focus primarily on our residential spaces. So the role of environmental cues in modulating habitual behaviors, we're going to highlight how intentional design can shape positive change. Now, if you've ever struggled to break a maladaptive habit, or you're struggling to create a new habit, this episode will equip you with the research-backed strategies you need to get started. So, habit loops, which are cues, environmental cues, routines, and reward systems, are deeply ingrained patterns that are governed by the part of our brain called the basal ganglia. And this is the part of the brain that is crucial for governing procedural memory and automatic behaviors. And by automatic behaviors, I mean behaviors that have become so ingrained in our subconscious that it's a habit. It's become a habit. So that's it. That's what is called automatic behavior. And a good example of that is, I'm going to use me as a case in point. An automatic behavior for me now is in the evenings, I don't think about whether or not I want to meditate. I meditate. It could take many different forms, and it always starts with turning off all of my lights and lighting candles in my bedroom. So for me, because I have cultivated that, and my brain has identified it as something that's beneficial to me and something that I use on a regular basis, it's wired those neural networks in my brain, and it's become an automatic behavior for me. So it's not I don't sit down wondering, am I going to light candles tonight? When I start to run out of candles, I start to feel a tiny bit of anxiety about what am I going to do tonight if I don't have candles. So for me, that's an automatic behavior without talking too much. And so we're going to dig deeper into these cues, routines, and reward systems. And in digging into it and building up on that, we're going to understand the habit loop that's essential for modifying behavior. So let's start with cues. A cue is a stimulus that activates a specific neural circuit that's associated with a behavior. So a cue, for instance, case in point, the candle. The cue is turning off the lights, looking for my box of matches or my lighter, right? And that's associated with my evening behavioral pattern of meditating before I go to sleep, right? A routine is the execution of the behavior itself, often automated by repeated reinforcement. Again, the routine is the turning off the lights, looking for my matches, bringing down all my candle holders, swapping out the old tea candles for fresh ones, lighting the candles, putting them back in their place, making sure, because I love to layer lighting in my space, not just artificial lighting, but artificial and candle lights. So I sort of stagger them in my space, higher up, mid-level, ground level. And so that for me is a routine, which is the execution of the behavior of winding down in the evening to meditate. And it's often automated by repeated reinforcement. So I've done this so many times. This routine has been going on for over a year. So it's been reinforced and it's become, a routine for me. And the third is the reward. So the reinforcement mechanism, often mediated by dopamine, that strengthens the neural pathway. So the reward that I get from this routine of meditation is I am more calm, I'm more focused, I'm more aware. I have seen the benefits of meditation and having a meditative practice, doing yoga nidra. Sleep onset is way easier. My mind is quieter, and that contributes to early sleep onset. If I do wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning due to a hot flush, or my mind is racing because of cortisol spike, for whatever reason, I'm in perimenopause, I'm expected to have, this sort of weird happenings. They're not weird, but they are expected endocrine responses based on my hormonal shifts. So when I do wake up in the middle of the night, I already have the tools to breathe through my hot flushes, to reduce the intensity, and to breathe myself back to sleep, to quiet my brain. I do breathing exercises. I use that time when I wake up to clear my mind again and to quiet my thoughts again and to breathe back into sleep. So that's the reward from that routine that has been created from the cues, the stimulus. I hope this explains it better. If you're still not clear, I would urge you to go listen to. I will have to look for that particular episode on the Huberman Lab, where he brilliantly explained this habit loop, the cue, routines, and reward systems. Not exactly in this way, but he's a more scientific perspective. And if you're a science nerd, you're going to love it. So I'll see if I can find the particular episode. It has lots of it. But if I can't find it, just look for the Huberman Lab and type in on his website reward systems, and you see a bunch of things come up. So anyway, let's go back to the podcast of today. So the reward is the reinforcement mechanism, often mediated by dopamine, that strengthens the neural pathways, right? So from a neuroscientific perspective, habits are encoded in the striatum and become more ingrained over time due to synaptic plasticity. I defined synaptic plasticity in the previous episode. So we're building up off the episode that we kicked this off with. So if you don't know what synaptic plasticity is, I explained it in the first episode introducing this series. And what this means, and this means that well-established habits are not simply erased but they require active restructuring through competing pathways. And this is a process known as competitive neuroplasticity. So for instance, if a person has a habit of late night snacking, right? The cue may be evening fatigue or emotional distress, and the routine is reaching for high sugar foods, and the reward is the subsequent dopamine surge from the sugar spike. So in order to disrupt this loop, one must weaken the original cue response association while simultaneously reinforcing an alternative behavioral sequence. So now let's explore why perimenopause and why hormonal changes in peri and postmenopause make habit change a little more challenging than it needs to be. Perimenopause is marked by significant hormonal fluctuations that directly impact our cognitive and emotional regulation, which then makes behavioral change a bit more complex. So there are several neurobiological mechanisms that can contribute to this challenge. The first is dopaminergic decline, and I'm going to explain it. Estrogen modulates dopamine function in the brain, particularly in the prefrontal cortex. That's the area of the brain that's responsible for executive function and self-regulation. And as estrogen declines, so does dopamine activity, which then leads to a reduced motivation and diminished reinforcement from new habits. The second is increased cortisol levels. So chronic stress during perimenopause and postmenopause can elevate cortisol levels, which then affects our hippocampal function and our memory formation. And what this does is it impairs the ability to encode new routines effectively, making habit formation less efficient. The third is altered sleep architecture. Sleep disturbances is very common in peri and postmenopause, and this impacts the consolidation of new habits because when we sleep, when we are in deep sleep, that is where that's where the neural pathways that strengthens habits and learning and all the things that you say. For instance, you learn something new during the day. It's when you sleep that your brain consolidates all of that information and wires it into something that you can dig back into. That's how you remember things later on. So yeah, a bad quality sleep impacts our ability to consolidate memories and also new habits. The brain undergoes synaptic pruning and memory integration during deep sleep. That's what I badly tried to explain earlier. And what this means is fragmented sleep disrupts the reinforcement of new neural patterns. And while these neurobiological shifts they pose challenges to us, the brain still remains highly plastic, which means all hope is not lost. And we just need to understand how to leverage our plastic brain to support us during this time of life. Habit change is still possible, but it requires greater reliance on structured cues, on environmental design, intentional environmental design, and behavioral consistency. So how does interior design play into this whole story, right? We can use intentional design to prime our brain for creating and reinforcing new habits. And this definition, let's just say it's called spatial habit triggers, or creation of environmental cues that inform and reinforce desired outcomes. For instance, if you're trying to break a habit and you're trying to create a new one, intentionally curating your space with environmental cues that help you reinforce the neural pathways that you need to create a new habit and to weaken the neural pathways that you need to break an old habit pattern. And so we're going to let's quickly run through. We're going to build upon this. We can't talk through this in one episode. So that's why I have 10 episodes. So they're short episodes, but they're going to be building off one another, and you're going to take away good stuff at the end of every episode. So let's talk spatial habit triggers and the role of the home environment in the creation of new habits and the breaking of old ones. Cognitive and environmental psychology studies, they emphasize the power of spatial priming. And what's spatial priming? Spatial priming is where our physical layouts in our home environment reinforces habitual behaviors and conversely breaks habitual behaviors. And this process occurs through something called associative learning, where certain spaces become linked with specific actions. If you have been following me on social media, I've been talking a lot about how creating specific zones in your space to reinforce habits creates this spatial priming thing, which then reinforces your habit loops through associative learning. So I'm going to run through 3 things that we can do to support this. The first is accessibility bias. So if an object that's related to a behavior that you're trying to create or you're trying to break is easily accessible, for instance, your mobile phone charger or your mobile phone is next to your bed, for instance, and I'm using that as a case in point because it's a very common occurrence. It was an unconscious behavior for me until recently. That behavior is more likely to be repeated, right? So the second is contextual anchoring, and by contextual anchoring I mean certain spaces trigger automatic responses in you. For instance, a kitchen counter may cue snacking if you have all of your snacks within view. And a bedroom space with a TV may cue nighttime binge watching. Or if your computer is in your bedroom or right next to your bed, it encourages you to pick up that computer and use it, unless you have very, very strong willpower. And more power to you if you're able to avoid nighttime TV watching in your bedroom. And every project that I worked on with clients, I always champion the cause for not having your TV in your bedroom, because your bedroom, again, with spatial priming, if you plan to use your bedroom for restorative sleep, then you should not have any environmental cues in your space that contradict that action. And one of them, and it's a big one for me, is a TV in your bedroom. I know some people consider it as a luxury thing, but it is not, I promise you. And this is where following trends or following ideologies, old school ideologies that were misinformed, does not serve the greater good of cognitive health. Right, so that's the second. The first was accessibility bias, which means that ease of access to that thing that triggers a behavior you're trying to break. Contextual anchoring, which means the spaces that trigger automatic responses to the thing, like a TV, like I mentioned, the TV. And the third is cognitive load reduction. So the brain conserves energy by defaulting to pre-established behaviors unless new cues disrupt that cycle. And so when we're redesigning the home environment, we can use this intentional redesign that is tailored to your specific cognitive needs. It can serve as a cognitive intervention to reprogram habits. For instance, if you place a yoga mat in the center of the room, or you set a book on the on your bedside table, or you use soft layered lighting in your home, you can create subconscious nudges that reinforce alternative behaviors, among other things. And this is where I'm going to shamelessly plug my Reinvention program. We cannot, I don't advise for people to overhaul their entire space at one go if the goal is to support your cognitive health, reinforce developing habits that you're trying to reinforce, and to break old habits that you're trying to break, or to support you on your journey through perimenopause and postmenopause, through hormonal changes and all the disruptions that come with it, the neuroendocrine disruptions that come with it, the cognitive disruptions that come with it. And that's why I created the Reinvention program. And the Reinvention program is a 6-month coaching program. It educates you on the neuropsychology of interior design, but we start off with understanding the processes that go on in our bodies, the brain, the body, and the environment. We make that connection so that you're aware of why we need to create environmental cues that supports and strengthens our cognitive health. And for those who sign up for the Reinvention Mastery, I offer one-on-one consultations, weekly consultations, where you can where you have the platform to ask as many questions as you want, and we work together to diagnose your space specific to your needs. We talk through what you're trying to achieve in your home, in your life, in this transformative phase, and we work together to make that happen, by reinforcing habits, by looking at your space, redesigning your space. Part of the Reinvention Mastery includes a interior design where we look at your space, we look at your spatial plan, we look at your lighting plan, we look at your zoning, among other things. There's so many moving parts to it, and that's why it needs to be 6 months long, because creating a new habit, neuroscience tells us it takes up to 66 days, between 66 and, I don't remember the higher number, up to 300 and something days. I did a bit of, I'm going to pop the link to the paper that I wrote on the subject on creating new habits. So you need, in order to create new habits, it's not something that you can accomplish and reinforce and integrate at one go. And if you're doing too many things at once, you're going to overload your brain and you're going to give up, because it will be too much for you to handle. So that's what the Reinvention program is about. It's one part educative, it's other parts showing you the connection between your brain and your environment, and then it shows you how you can use your home environment to create this life that you're trying to create for yourself moving forward. So let's talk about a case study really quickly on rewiring a late night screen habit. So a real life example of applied neuroscience. This is it. A woman in her early 50s. This is hypothetical, by the way. It's not like a real person. So a woman in her early 50s struggles with late night screen use, which disrupts her sleep quality. That is all of us, right? In perimenopause and postmenopause, if we're using screens late at night without the blue, without a blue light filter, or activating the red screen thing that I use, that is one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is brain arousal. So if you're using your phone late at night and you're watching content that activates your brain or arouses your brain and keeps you in an excited state, that also prevents you from falling asleep. So there's two sides. There's so many sides to it, but those are the two major ones. Blue light tricks your brain into thinking it's still daytime. Cognitive arousal keeps your brain in an excited state and prevents you from going to sleep quicker. So let's go back to this hypothetical woman. And she then decides to leverage principles of habit formation and environmental psychology. She implements the following strategies. Cue disruption. So instead of leaving her phone charger on the nightstand, she decides to relocate it to the kitchen. And this action breaks the automatic loop of bedtime scrolling because she has no access to it. And what she could replace that with is she establishes a pre-sleep ritual that involves dimming all her lighting. She introduces aromatherapy. And instead of her mobile phone, she's reading a book without the blue screen. And that creates an alternative, lower stimulation habit for her. And what the reward reassessment is that instead of the immediate dopamine hit from social media engagement and all this cognitive arousal that comes from it, she shifts her reinforcement to the long-term benefits of improved sleep quality and cognitive clarity the following day. Now, neuroimaging studies show that, link to the research in the show notes as always, neuroimaging studies show that habit reversal training can rewire neural circuits by weakening old pathways and strengthening new competing ones. And within several weeks of integrating this strategy, the new behavior becomes self-reinforcing due to improved sleep and well-being. Now, what is the takeaway here? Habit change in perimenopause starts with our home environment. Breaking and building habits require a lot more than willpower. Because if you've got all the willpower in the world and you have environmental cues competing with that willpower, you're not going to get very far. It involves working with your brain's neurobiology to create sustainable change. And since perimenopause already alters our neurotransmitter function and cognitive flexibility, when we leverage environmental design, we create structured routines and we use this contextual priming, we start to see how essential it is for habit modification. And when we start to leverage all of these and we start to see the results, that seeing of the result reinforces our desire to add on new habits once we've successfully created a new habit. Again, for me, the biggest for me, which has impacted so many areas of my life, my ability to focus the next day, how I wake up in the morning, because when I go to bed with a robust meditative practice, and I'm practicing gratitude. At the end of the day, there is a habit that I just recently integrated into my evening routine, where in the morning, when I wake up in the morning, I tell myself I'm grateful to be awake and alive. I'm a Christian, so it was an automatic thing for me without really thinking about why I had that practice. But now that I'm aware of what it does to my brain, that has reinforced how grateful I am to God for keeping me alive, for the breath in my body, and my appreciation for this intelligent system called my human body and how it sustains me is such an amazing thing. So anyway, back to when I wake up in the morning, I make a list of what I plan to accomplish that day. And at the end of the day, I look through my to-do list and I tick off all of the things that I accomplished. And I congratulate myself. I say I'm proud of myself for accomplishing this goal. So that I just integrated that into my nighttime routine, just sort of looking back on my day and seeing, as opposed to focusing on what I didn't accomplish, I focus on what I have accomplished, right? And I tell myself, it's okay. You accomplished this. Tomorrow is another day. We're going to go for it even stronger than the day before. So consider, I'm going to close this by asking you to consider habits that you wish to change, and what small environmental or cognitive shifts you can implement today to facilitate that transformation. Because by aligning habit change strategies with your brain's plasticity mechanisms, even those deeply ingrained behaviors that you're unconscious and unaware of, those can be reshaped. And the more you understand, you start to intentionally look at your space and your behaviors. You start to become aware of habits that were unconscious to you before, but you're now becoming aware of them, and you'll be able to reshape them. Your life is quite literally in your hands, and you have the power and the agency to create the life that you want using the strategies that are available to you, that I'm providing for you in this podcast series. So we've gotten to the end of the podcast. It's a really short one. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you found this episode insightful, share it with a friend who is navigating habit change, or share it with your colleagues who are in perimenopause and postmenopause, and they're struggling with keeping up with life in general and just need that little help. And remember, your environment is a silent architect of your behaviors, and by redesigning your surroundings, you have the power and agency to sculpt the habits that align with your goals and your dreams, and in creating the life that you desire. See you in the next episode. Have a great day.